means bad air. People thought these diseases were caused by putrid smelling swamp gas and that sort of thing. Like, for instance, in London in the 1854 cholera outbreak there, people thought it was from the miasma. And, John Snow, the father of epidemiology, was running. There's a great book on that called, oh, good Lord, I've forgotten. I've read more than 60 books on pandemic because I'm a war correspondent, and pandemic, famine, and war go together. But there's a great book on cholera in 1854 called The Ghost Map. It's called The Ghost Map because John Snow mapped out the cases, and that's how he started to discover that the Broad Street pump there, the pump handle, that's where the epidemiologists always say, remove the pump handle. He said, this cholera is not coming from miasma. It's not coming from the malaria. It's coming from that water pump, I think. And he did various tests and he mapped it out. And anyway, long story short, turns out he was right, And so, but this idea that bad air caused all these, that was the same problem here with the Panama Canal. So one of numerous reasons that the United States succeeded where France and the Scottish failed was because we were becoming wiser about diseases, right? And it took time. It took the advent of the microscope. Scottish didn't have microscopes in the 1690s, and nobody quite realized how bad the mosquitoes were even in the late 1800s until the early 1900s. That's when Willem Gorgas came, and he's got the Gorgas Institute is right down the road from me here. That's the big mosquito man who really started to discover, hey, we got to fight these mosquitoes, right? Anyway, long story short, the World Health Organization and all these clowns now have weaponized this against us. I'm looping back around here to the United Nations. The United Nations has a huge headquarters here. It used to be the U.S. Army South headquarters at Fort Clayton. Now it's called Ciudad del Saber, City of Knowledge. It's right beside the Panama Canal. This used to be Fort Clayton, U.S. Army South headquarters. Now it's called City of Knowledge, Ciudad del Saber. So right now out there today, there's a huge amount of Panamanian flags out because Secretary Rubio is here. But this book, or not book, this is a magazine, Sapiens. As you know, there's a book by this name by Yuval Harari, the big guy at the World Economic Forum, who are all consanguinated with China and with United Nations, right? These magazines are handed out in the City of Knowledge, right? That's where I got this. Was in the city. I've stayed there for months. There's a Holiday Inn and that right beside all their headquarters, right? I'm not there right now because there's mold in that Holiday Inn and it's making us all sick. And so disease again. But the bottom line is United Nations, chiefly funded by the United States, is doing the bidding of Chinese Communist Party. Now, and not just with the invasions, with the weaponized migration. It's not migration, it's straight up invasions. There are also, for instance, we've got a military base in the Indian Ocean, I'm sure you've heard of, Diego Garcia, British protectorate there, or territory. What's the proper word for that? The United Nations is trying to take that away from the British and give it to Mauritius, right? Now, Mauritius, what claim does Mauritius have on Diego Garcia? Well, we have a huge military base there, which is vital in the Indian Ocean. China wants that because they'll be able to close down, between that and some other things, they can close down the Strait of Malacca and all kinds of other things, right? Not to go into that, but the bottom line is it's vital. And so the United Nations is working hard to take that away and give it to Mauritius. Now, if you look closely at Mauritius, China is that. So basically giving it to Mauritius is giving it to China, right? So that's where I say, when I say the United Nations is doing the bidding of China, it's not, it may sound crazy, but this is what we do 7 days a week, years on end. In the last 4 years alone, we've been in 30 countries exactly researching this, right? So this is what we do all over the world. So I can't unfold it in 90 minutes or even 30 days. So I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version here. We have to dismantle, we have to defund and dismantle the United Nations. Now, Tom Homan, who's the new border czar under Trump, called me recently, and he was asking about the Darien Gap down here in Panama. And I said to him, I've been across the entire U.S. southern border from SpaceX on the Gulf side, which is right on the Mexican border, all the way to San Diego. I've been across the entire border. It took months, and much of that on the Mexican side and up on the Canadian border. I've been there as well. That's over 5,000 miles long. I haven't been across that entire border, but that border is not guarded either. We've been to Bahamas looking at that border. That's like America's fourth border. We've been looking at this quite a lot. I told Tom Homan, the new border czar, everybody I've talked with about Tom Homan says he's a very serious man. I don't personally know him, just communications. But I said to Tom Homan, I said, sir, if we're going to get serious about this, closing the Darien Gap won't do it. That's like turning off the sprinklers during a hurricane. We have to turn off the hurricane. We have to shut down the arsonists, not the little fires here and there. The arsonists are the United Nations. We have to defund them and dismantle them and start arresting people that are involved in human smuggling, such as Amy Pope, the IOM director up in New York. Amy Pope, IOM is the International Organization for Migration. They are the chief ones responsible for many of these flows, whether that be into the United Kingdom, Netherlands. I've been to all these places looking at it. Argentina, Masako Ganaha, the Japanese journalist, and I, in November, so just a few months ago now, we were down in Buenos Aires. We walked into the IOM office and we asked for a job. And they said they weren't hiring because President Trump had just been elected. He wasn't inaugurated yet. It was November. And they said there's a hiring freeze at the United Nations now, so they're not hiring anybody. And they were worried about their funding being cut. We can cut their funding. Now, one military officer told me a few days ago, he said, we need to study the United Nations and figure out where to cut funding. I'm like, the study is done, sir. Cut them off. We don't need the United Nations. They are our enemies. It's like, why would you study the Nazi party and see, well, we should cut down this bureau and not the other? Why don't we just take them out of action? We do not need them. They are our enemies, and we are funding our enemies right now. Department of Homeland Security has a new director now, but before the new director was there, we had Alejandro Mayorkas, who was a board member on something called HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, funded chiefly by the United States and private funders. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society is one of the chief invasion arms working with IOM down in the Darien. I have spent months down in the Darien. I know this problem set very well. So when people are throwing me, these government people are always telling me about their security clearances. Like, you don't know what's going on. Anytime a government person throws his security clearance on the table as a playing card in the meeting, it's over. They're a clown. I've found that through years of experience, right? So these government people constantly tell me, I don't know what's going on in Darien. And I say, when was the last time you were in Darien? They don't go because they read their reports, which are done from OSINT, open source. They're getting it from the newspapers, which are owned by the oligarchical structures, right? So I'm down on the ground in the Darien Gap. I can assure you with 100% certainty that the HIAS is one of the chief invasion forces. Now, Alejandro Mayorkas, our former chief of Homeland Security, was a board member on HIAS. So you can go to HIAS.org, HAIS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS.org, and you can see them congratulating Alejandro Mayorkas from leaving HIAS as a board member and becoming the director of United States Homeland Security, the people who are running the invasion into the United States, working that close with the United Nations and HIAS. HIAS has an office right next to San Vicente camp in the Darien province. I've been in that camp at least 50 times. I've been in the total camps down there. I've been into them way over 150 times. I've been in these camps, whether it's Bajo Chiquito, Canan Membrillo, and all you guys with your security clearances. If you haven't been to Bajo Chiquito, if you've never heard of Canan Membrillo, if you don't know Lajas Blancas, you don't know anything about what's going on down there. Now, as of last night, Imbra Indians down there, I'm out with the Indians a lot. the invasion goes through the Cuna Comarca. Comarca is the Indian reservation, and it goes through the Imbra Wunan Comarca Uno, which is the number one. There's these different comarcas, which means reservation, right? As of last night, I got another message from an Imbra Indian down there, because I spent months with the Indians, in saying that the flow of the migrante, of the invaders, has gone to almost zero because the funding has been cut to the United Nations operations and the NGOs down there, right? So this is what I've been saying for years. We have to cut the United Nations. The moment we cut them, these flows are going to decrease. It will not stop everything, but it will cut off the major part of the hurricane, right? Then we can start cleaning up. But again, in a meeting I just had a week ago, big guy, big security clearance, he's like, cutting the funding of the United Nations won't do any good.